Welcome to High Level Human Podcast, Episode 3. I am your host. I am James McGee. Today we have another one of my classmates, Chief Tom Wells from the Cincinnati, Ohio area. So Tom Wells is a very accomplished man. He is also he's recently retired. He is also a railroad engineer. He is has an obsession and a love for trains, and we often our classmates, my classmates and I often get pictures of him with trains, and he's just a super human being, and definitely a high level human being. So I chose Tom for this episode, and I'm going to save it for when him and I are talking. But today is the anniversary. It's a tragic anniversary, but I think it's important to honor uh, the officer that he had that was killed in the line of duty 4 years ago today, but also honor him, the leader and the man that he is, and what it takes to be a leader. And he has proven that he has what it takes to be a leader. So every year we meet up. Several of us meet up at our conference in for the National Academy. So I guess it was in 22. It was in Cleveland, Ohio. Tom was presenting. It was on the last day, one of the last classes of the conference. So didn't really have an interest in going to a class on the last day. And it was on line of duty deaths, administrators, how to handle my line of duty deaths. Well, I didn't do that anymore then. I'd already retired from the sheriff's office, and I was at the district attorney's office. I handled all the line of duty deaths and all the funerals for almost 20 years, and it's taxing. It's honorable. It is something that it was a great honor to do. Man, it's hard. So I really didn't have an interest, but there is a tradition. Tom's a good friend of mine. There is a tradition that if one of your classmates is presenting, it's unwritten rule, you go. So I went and I listened to him, and so it was around 2 years after it happened, and I remembered it happening, and I did reach out to him, but after during the presentation, man, I started feeling just like an asshole. I, the things that he was telling us, what he was going through in life was absolutely terrible. On top of this, he had several other things going on. Just showed what kind of man he is to be able to endure this. So, man, I felt terrible. So afterwards, after the class, he opened up for questions. Well, I didn't have a question. I stood up and I talked about Tom, told him I was proud of him in front of this group of people, told him I loved him, told him I was sorry for not reaching out to him beforehand. So the next day we left the conference. Well, Tom had drove. He was only a couple hours away, and I was at the airport. Well, I get a phone call from him. And Tom's an emotional guy. He's just a good dude. And he was crying. I could tell he was crying, and he said, James, I really appreciate you saying the things that you did. And he said, talked about how great of a man that I am. And then I really felt bad because I don't feel like I was the man that he was describing. And so, and I gave this last year. We had a retirement party for him at our conference, and I said this then, and I said that to myself back in 2022. In 2022, I decided that my goal in life was to live my life and to be the man that Tom Wells thinks I am. And I try every day, because if a man of that caliber thinks that of me, then I owe it to him, I owe it to myself, and I owe it to the world to be that man. So, ladies and gentlemen, Chief Tom Wells.
Welcome to the High Level Human Podcast, a production of the James McGee Show. James McGee. He pulls no punches. He's in your face, and he keeps it real. Join him for candid discussions about life, leadership, and living the life of a high-level human.
All right.
My brother, Tommy Wells.
Hello.
Man, thank you for being with us. And you're on location in Springdale?
Well, actually, I'm in Liberty Township, Ohio, which is about 15 minutes from Springdale.
Okay. Where's that in reference to Cincinnati?
About 20 miles north of the city itself.
Okay. I gave a little intro about you, Tom. Tell us a little bit where you're from, and you're a suburb of Cincinnati. Tell us a little bit about that, about your career. And you can I guess we're summing up a 33-year career in, 10 minutes or so, but give us a little something on that.
That's how fast it felt like the career went by. I'll tell you that.
You're right about that. We retired around the same time, actually.
Yeah, we sure did. Well, it kind of started out, I grew up in the city of Cincinnati, and my mom, she was a longtime employee of the University of Cincinnati. So we lived close to that. And, over my youth, I had a lot of different hobbies, and one that really stuck, as you can see from right behind me here, is I'm a big train nerd. And I got really heavily into trains, and that's actually what I wanted to do for a living. But back in the late 70s, that's kind of the railroad industry was kind of seeing, not so much there was a downturn, but it was just going through a lot of regulation, and there were a lot of people retiring, and it just wasn't in the cards. And I really, really liked the idea of public service. So I kind of knew already toward the end of high school that I wanted to be a police officer. So I kind of focused my sights on that through college, and I was able to join the Police Explorer post with the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office, which was invaluable as far as teaching some tactics and listening and learning from people that were really solid veteran officers. I really learned so much from them, especially how to just how to talk to people, And I went to the police academy there at the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office and got on there part-time. And eventually I wound up getting a full-time job at another sheriff's department in Claremont County, where they were hiring people directly to work the road patrol. And I was working out there for about a year, and you talk about spread thin. There were about 3 of us typically on a shift, 3 to 4, to spread around 10 townships. So you were either talking or you were fighting. And I learned quickly that talking was the better route. And so it was a great experience. I learned so much that first year, and I hated to leave there. I had an opportunity to go to Springdale, the department I was with my whole career there, and I really had a hard time deciding to leave there, but had a really good career at Springdale. So hired in there as a patrol officer and held pretty much every rank they had there. I was patrol officer, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and then rounded out the career as chief.
So you were the chief. You became chief in 2020?
Yep.
Okay. When did you become? You were assistant chief when we went to the academy together, right?
No, actually, I was still a lieutenant then. I became assistant chief in 2011.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what were some of the highlights? And we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about one of the worst days of your life. And I appreciate you opening up. And that means a lot to me. And I know to our listeners, and you are like me, you want people to learn from your mistakes and your tragedies. And you had one hell of a tragedy. So we'll get to that in the second half. But what were some of the highlights of your career? And also tell us, what do you feel like? Now, I can give my own opinions, and I know you're a humble guy, but you rose pretty good and you did well. And that's a suburb of a real big city.
Yeah.
How did Tom Wells become Tom Wells?
Well, I think probably to start off, it was really my mom. My dad died when I was very young, so it was just my mom and I growing up, and it was a very I felt a lot of love in the home. And my mom, she was a kind of very selfless person. She grew up at a young age and during World War II. She was in Germany, so they were doing everything they could just to survive there. And so she was a very salt of the earth.
So your parents were that generation?
Yes.
So your parents were older. Okay.
Yeah. So she really was a very, she was the kind of a person that she took work, work was very important to her. She took it seriously. She took, raising me very seriously. She was a very loving mom and very, somebody who, she understood what hardship was about. She wanted to make sure we had a a good life. So at a young age, she took me on a lot of vacations. We went out west a lot. She gave me this total passion for the Western United States, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, all those mountain areas. I just love them. And then she was always very encouraging. And so I was very fortunate to have a really good foundation from that standpoint. And, once I started, became a police officer again, like I said, I had some really good mentors when I was a police explorer. I had one of the best mentors you could ever ask for as our post advisor. And there was so he taught me a lot in terms of policing. And then as a friend, I had a best friend growing up in high school that I met who was also another trained guy. And his dad was kind of like the dad I never had. And he was also very instrumental in my development. So I was really fortunate to have a lot of good people, that were, sort of showing me the way. And once I started in the police department, I noticed, at a relative, I was young. I started, even though I worked a year at Claremont, I was only 22 when I started at Springdale, actually. And so I was still very young, very, kind of green. And but one thing I noticed right away is a lot of the supervisors we had were kind of old school, and they just didn't understand how to get the most out of their people, to encourage their people. There was a lot of do as I say. And a lot of kind of, a lot of it was military background. And I get that, but it wasn't an environment where you really felt like people were, maybe all that encouraging as they could be. And so I had a couple that really were. So I really, again, I sort of took to them, and I realized at a fairly early point in my career that I wanted to go into supervision, because I wanted to be that supervisor that, provided a place where people would want to go to work, a flourishing environment. That was important to me. And so so I was very fortunate the way things worked out to get promoted only 8 years into sergeant. And then I was a lieutenant for 12 years. And that really, I learned a lot during that time. And I really felt like that was sort of like the real stride of my career. I really enjoyed being a field lieutenant, and really learned a lot, and was able to do a lot of things to, as far as different, responsibilities in addition to patrol stuff, that I was able to do things to make it, a permanent stamp on the department. And so I was, that was really, really satisfying, and felt good to be able to give back like that. And, when I had eventually the opportunity to go into the police administration, my goal was I wanted to make it a place where people wanted to come to work, really was the bottom line. It didn't always work out perfectly, but that was always my goal.
So I'd said earlier when we were visiting that we would discuss this at the end, but let's hit this now. When you talk about it's a place where people want to come to work.
Yeah.
And like I also said, you and I are retired now.
Yep.
We speak a little more freely. And you've always spoke freely, and that's always been a big respect I had of you. You could tell just by some of your Facebook posts. And I told you earlier, man, I would tell my wife sometimes, man, I hope Tom's about to retire, because and he end up firing his ass. No. But it was right. And you know what? It needed to be said. And you were a leader, and you were the chief, and you had to say these things, and you did.
Yeah.
And we need more people like you. Got to have more leaders like you that are gonna think of the men and women that are in their charge, and not of themselves in their own career. We have a recruiting problem throughout the nation, police officers.
Yes.
What do you think that's about?
I think it's the bottom line is that people don't feel like they can go into this career and be supported. There's so many things that, the city governments seem to have so much corruption or lack of support of the police, and they don't stick up. Like I said, I am outspoken, but I don't ever do anything that's going to get me in trouble. To me, I just speak the truth. And I think that's one of the things I wish a lot of more police leaders would do, is quit worrying so much about that whole thing about, well, am I going to get fired for this? Am I going to get in trouble for that? Most city leaders want you to do your job. And that means take care of and run your department, and have good character and have integrity and do the right thing. And I learned that lesson early on in my career. I had a friend I was on the honor guard with, and I don't remember even what it was, but I was dealing with some predicament, and I was talking it over with him, and he goes, Tom, he goes, I learned this a long time ago, the one rule of thumb: when in doubt, do the right thing. And that really stuck with me. I know it sounds almost a little cliche to say that, but it's so true. And that guided me through what we're going to talk about here in a little bit with with Kaya.
No, but, you're right. You're right.
And to me, again, my message for police leaders out there is, when in doubt, just do the right thing. If what you're doing is legal, moral, and ethical, and it's for the betterment of your city, your department, and your people in that order, do it and say what needs to be said.
Yep. And I think that when you do that, and I know there's been some police administrators who just got the raw end,
Sure.
but I'll tell you this: if you want to sit in a swivel chair, when it's time to swivel, you're gonna fucking swivel. You can't just sit on your hands and sit on your ass and worry about your own career. When
Yeah.
it's time to swivel, fucking
Yeah.
swivel.
That's
And
right.
you would swivel when it was time, and that's why you were a successful leader.
Well, I appreciate that.
And you're right, and you care. I can imagine. I wish I could have went to your retirement party. I know we did a little makeshift one at our conference last year, but I would have loved to talk to some of the officers and some of the people that worked with you, because I know that they felt it, and there's no bigger feeling than that.
Well, I appreciate
So we'll talk about a good friend of mine and who became a good friend of yours, Mark Krause. Went to the National Academy with both of us, and y'all became. I got to know you more through Mark.
Yeah.
We had our own. We had a crew together, and then we spun off a little bit. And you and Mark became really good friends.
Yeah.
Well, at his retirement party, and Mark is like me. He's like you. People. Not everybody's going to like us.
Yeah.
And we'll do some things and say some things that aren't popular. But one thing I said about him at his retirement party, he said the same thing about me, and I'm gonna say it about you. Mark Krause and Tom Wells and James McGee are the champion of the little man. And with all the faults that we have and all the dumb shit that we've done, there's nothing. We never forgot who we were there for.
Right.
And that, I think, there's a lot of reasons I feel like you became Tom Wells, but I can tell you right now, that's the main reason is because it was never about you. It was always about, other people. Let's talk a little bit about the National Academy. That's where you and I met. Tell me what your experience in that, and not just during those. It was 15 years. Shit, what this week is 15 years we graduated.
Yes.
This week, 15 years.
I loved it.
And so I guess that tomorrow would be 15 years. But not only those 10 weeks 15 years ago, but since then, in the last 15 years, what has that organization done to change your life?
Yes, a lot. Let me just tell you real fast before I start on that. It just made me think of something when you said that about the champion of the little people. One of my favorite stories my mom ever told me was when she was in Germany, and she and her mom and her sister, they were fleeing from town to town to avoid the Allied bombardments that were going on, and they lost their house. They lost basically everything they had, and they were staying one night in some train tower, like some railroad yard tower or whatever, and there were some railroad workers there that they could tell it was obvious that they were going to size them up for having a little action with them. And there were American soldiers there. And she said these soldiers came and basically shooed these idiots away from them and stood outside and basically stood watch while they slept. And she said, right then and there, I knew I was going to be an American. And that's being a champion for little people. And that's her. You're right. Her understanding that whole concept and why America is such a great place and why this country is that of that philosophy too. It's for everybody. And I just wanted to throw that in there because I just love that. I thought it was such a neat. So about the national. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say about the National Academy is, it was one of those things. I'd been on the waiting list for like 7 years, and every chief in our department had been through it at some point in their career. And I had a great respect for the FBI. Nowhere in my wildest dreams could I imagine how much it would have helped me get through this critical incident that I had through and through. The experience there was, the thing I think I got out of it most at the time when I was there, because I didn't know what to expect, was number one, the friendships and the networking that would be. I mean, just like with us, I mean, we probably didn't talk that much at the academy, but then having met after, look, we're best friends now. It's incredible how these connections are made. And these are lifelong. I mean, this is like things like I feel like I've known you my whole life, and we will know each other our whole lives because that's how important the connection is. Right. And the other thing was when I got there, I had signed up for a lot of leadership type, the typical, leadership class, this and that. And when I realized that they had classes on things like media relations and death investigation and forensics and officer involved shootings, I dumped all my classes and registered for those because I said, if there's any place where I'm going to see some excellent work when it comes to those kind of things, it'll be at the FBI. And I was not let down. It was fantastic. And then again, like I said, later on, once I got back to Ohio, I became actively involved in our chapter. And with the training that the chapter provided and the different, they would bring in people from the cases like the Boston bombing or the Amish schoolhouse shooting in Pennsylvania or the hostage taker in Alabama with the school bus. And they would bring the actual local police officers and the FBI people that worked with them to go over these cases. And you're talking about people standing on stage crying about, and the emotions and everything. And I always was fascinated by these stories because they were so, the cooperation and everything that was involved. And I always thought to myself, you know what, this is fantastic information. I'm getting access to things that most people would never have a chance to see. Little did I know that was preparing me for something that I never thought would happen in our city, which is a major critical incident, and that how much of those trainings would make me say one of the first things I said to myself on that night was, I can get through this because they did, and I will.
Well, I can tell you the media class at the NA, and I forget what the guy's name was. He was a Marine PIO. That dude was top notch. That was probably the best class that I took there.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you that I talk a lot, Tom, about us being environmental, and we're products of our environment. Like I told Joe last week, you hang out with high level people, surround yourself with that, you'll probably be high level. You hang out with jerk offs, you're going to be a jerk off.
Yeah.
And right. I will tell you this. So you've met my wife, and she went to the NA at the end of the year before last,
awesome.
of 2022.
So great.
And I have one of her classmates coming on next week. And so I'm going to talk a little more in depth about that. But what I told her, the two things I told her was, you're going to meet, you may not believe me, but you're going to meet in just 10 weeks, you're going to meet people that are going to be your best friends the rest of your life.
Yep.
You're going to meet up with them. You're going to go to their house. And she's like, I don't know about that. Well, she knows I'm right now. She met some great ladies. The other thing I told her was, you're also going to realize, and she's like everybody else that goes there. They're accomplished and done a lot. I said, you're a big fish in a little pond. You're going to realize you get over there, you're not shit.
Right.
And everybody there, just being around. And when we go to the conference, we're environmental, being around people like you and, Joe Collins had Joe Collins last week, and, Jim Leonard, who was high ranking at CHP, people like that, man, how can you go wrong when you recognize that what you can, now some people don't learn anything because they already know everything.
You're right.
When you're humble like you are, and you recognize that what you're around, man, you can just grow so much. I learned something besides all the ball busting we do. I learned something from each of you every time I'm around you.
Yeah. I agree. I feel the same way about it. I never have been with a group where I feel like I learn so much and become better in terms of a person, in terms of enrichment of my life from being around people like you and all these guys we talk about, and the guys from Ohio that I'm on the executive board in Ohio. I would have never joined the executive board.
Well, they're my friends now because they're always with you. Yep.
What's that?
They're my friends now because they're always with you at the conference, and I've gotten to know them.
Exactly.
Who's the one that retired last week or recently? You were on Facebook with them.
Oh, Ron Salos, he's the chief of Powell, Ohio. He's the president of our chapter.
That the guy that's always with us in our group at the conference. Were you on Facebook?
Oh, no, that's Steve Saunders from Cincinnati.
Yeah. Man, that's good. That
dude. Guy is good people, isn't he? Yeah, he's getting ready to retire next month. He's
is he really?
Yep, and he was the PIO for Cincinnati here recently, and then he got promoted to captain, and he's now in charge of the entire homicide bureau for the city of Cincinnati. Wow. And you talk about just a man among men. I mean, this guy is just, you talk about a huge heart, solid guy, one of my best friends, and I met him the night that Kaya was killed, and that's how we got friends.
And that when you talked to, he was that's when I met him. Was 2 years ago when you gave that presentation. Yeah. And I could tell just the way you talked about him, and him and I I consider him a friend now, and talk about just, a great guy, and surrounding yourself with people like him. So since we mentioned her, let's go ahead and get into that. Let's go ahead and dive into what I know it was absolutely one of the worst days of your life. And ironically, today, it's not ironic, we decided to do it today.
Right.
Because it is 4 years of her death today.
Yes.
And, I'll give it to you and let you tell the story of what happened.
Well, there's so many. I'll try to keep it the Reader's Digest version to a degree here, and then we can explore little bits and pieces of it because there's so many parts of this. But the long and the short of it was a normal Saturday like any other. It was a day you never think anything's going to happen. I remember the end of that week. Well, let me start out with one of the big details was that I had just gotten promoted to chief on February 18th. So here it was 33 days after becoming chief of police. And I'm sitting at home. We had just had a conversation on that Friday about on this upcoming pandemic and how was this going to impact us and how the COVID-19 was going to be this, we had no idea what it was going to do. And we were just trying to already just get ahead of it a little bit. And then I got that phone call on Saturday evening, a little bit after 7:00 from one of our officers who was working the desk on overtime. And she said that there had been a traffic pursuit and that there was an officer that was struck and that they were performing CPR on the officer and it didn't look good, but she didn't know who it was at that point. So of course I thanked her for the information. I told her, I said, I'll be on my way. And I jumped up, told my wife, Laura, what was going on. And I went, it's funny how you think about things at the time. Like my first thought was, well, there's going to be, I knew people that the people that were dealing with it were totally, they didn't need me there. I wasn't going to be there to be doing anything there, but I needed to be there obviously as a chief to represent the department. So I went in the bedroom and I thought, what am I going to wear? And I threw on an FBI sweat, like not a sweatshirt, but like a pullover type thing that looked halfway professional. And I thought just in case, whatever. And I just, I had some jeans. And because I had my uniform at work. So I thought I'll just throw this basic stuff on and see what's going on. And by the time I got out to my car, I got a second phone call from Officer Hochter. And she said that she identified the officer that was down. And that was Kaya Grant, who was one of our police officers. And it just took the wind out of me. I just, I was like getting hit with a 2x4 for a second, realizing that, this is something you see all the time in these emails. You constantly get emails from the Officer Down Memorial page about officers here and there and everywhere. And I've known, I've had personal friends. One who was killed in the line of duty that was just devastating for me, but he wasn't on my department. And so as devastating as it wasn't the same as losing one of your own. And our department had never lost an officer. So once I kind of went into cop mode at that point, and I realized I got to get my head together and get down there. And so I was flying down to the scene. And I can remember so many people already blowing my phone up with texts and trying to reach me by phone. And the texts were things like, oh my God, who is it? I'm so sorry. And all these different things. And here I'm trying to call all my supervisors on the phone and get them in there. And I told our officer, no information goes out. Get a hold of, I need you to get a hold of people and, start the cavalry coming in there. And I was trying to reach our command staff so we could get because I knew this was an all hands on deck. Right. So the long and short of it was I got to the scene and she was, believe it or not, she was still there and they were working on her. And I knew when I saw her, I knew she was dead when I saw her, but they were not going to give up. They were working so hard to try to save her. And they took her by helicopter to the University Hospital. And in the meantime, I went and made notification to her mom, and her mom and dad had never been married, and her mom lived in the Cincinnati area and her dad lived in Georgia. And one of the things I realized right away was that our personal data form that had her information on it only had phone numbers for the two of them because she wasn't married. So there were no addresses, no next of kin addresses or anything on there. And I thought, oh my God, how did we miss this? So here I am thinking, I know where her mom lives, but I have no idea where in the Atlanta area, the New York of the South, the dad lives. Yeah. Right. So anyway, I went down there, I notified her mom, and that was a hugely traumatic thing. She obviously she was devastated by the information. She became very angry with me, which in hindsight, I totally understand. But at the moment I wasn't expecting it, even though they teach you that in these death notification classes that you can expect people to be angry. And then, once I got, there were other people there with me and they were helping me get her together because I wanted to take her to the hospital. I knew by that time that she had been pronounced dead and I wanted to get her down there so she could at least say goodbye to her. And in the meantime, I had to figure out how to notify dad. And in the end, I broke the cardinal sin of calling him by phone because I didn't have any other way of getting an officer to his house. And I thought I wanted to hear it from me. And in the end,
either that or he's going to find it on Facebook.
Exactly. That's one of the things I was really worried about.
These days, you got to go outside the book on that.
Exactly. I mean, I learned later on after this that there were departments that had already put rest in peace Kaya on their Facebook pages.
Oh, wow.
I mean, within 15, 20 minutes, because there were 30 or 40 officers and firefighters at the scene there who were doing they were basically standing around once the dust settled. And
we've got to do better as a profession.
I know, and it's horrible. And it's not that people mean any ill will, but that's why my phone was blowing up. It's because all these people were blowing their people's phones up, and they're all trying to call me.
Human nature to be the first with the most.
Yes,
and
yes.
that's devastating if people find out about a loved one that way.
Yes. And there was a second officer that was involved, Sergeant Andy Davis, and he was nearly killed in the whole thing. And he had been taken to another hospital, and I was given initial information that his injuries were life-threatening. So I'm sitting there trying to decide, do I go to that hospital? What do I do? Unfortunately, the previous assistant chief, who was retired, he'd already heard, and he went straight there. And I got word that he was there with him, and it turned out his injuries, it was actually minor injuries. So I was really glad that somebody who knew, from an administrative side, I knew that he would take care of him. So I was able to focus on Kaya's family. But, there's that whole aspect is that the guy who lives gets forgotten, you know what I mean? And I wanted to make sure that we took care of Andy, and Andy was back at the PD by the time I got back from the hospital. Andy was back at the PD, and I asked him as a show of strength to our officers. I said, I totally understand if you would feel uncomfortable with this, but I would like it if you would stand up with me at the podium when I do the press conference to show our department that you are going to be the symbol of strength to get us through this. And he agreed. And that's just the kind of man he is. He's a solid, salt of the earth guy. And he knew what needed to be done too. And he readily did it, as much as I'm sure it killed him to do that, because he was just still reeling from the pain of being with her when she was killed. Thank God he didn't see it happen, but he was the last one with her, So yeah. And then there's
that was definitely pretty rough. So let's talk a little bit about so that happens. And here's the thing too. And I talked a little bit last night on Wine Wednesday. I had an incident that really defined, I was a young sergeant, lost a person.
Mm-hmm.
What I said was the difference is in our game, if you call it a game, there's no timeouts. So you still are police chief, still have calls, still have all kinds of other stuff going on. And now you lost an officer. You have to bury her, dealing with COVID. Let's talk about the aftermath of that.
Yeah. Well, and that's really the perfect segue into the next part of this. Once the dust had settled and you wake up the next day and you realize that life is going to go on, and that you have great people around you. I mean, I couldn't ask for a better group of people at my department that everybody stepped up, and we had neighboring departments step up. We had a police department that completely took over our patrols. I mean, when I say completely, they were already in a COVID staffing setup to where they were able to plug their officers into our department for 10 days so that none of our people had to work. We told people, if you want to come in and help with the funeral or just be in there to help each other out or whatever, but no one's going to answer calls. And they just stepped right in and took over. And we had 2 sergeants that volunteered each 12-hour shifts for a week to oversee that. And it was, those are the kind of little things that you just are so blessed to have, as people that just step up. And, I had patrol officers I put in charge of things like family liaison and setting up the funeral with the help of the Cincinnati Police Department, because without them, we could have never done what we did. And they just totally rose to the occasion. I mean, people like Keenan Reardon and, Barry Norris and Melissa Abel, those were 3 patrol officers. I remember sitting there in a meeting saying, you all have the authority to act as if you were me. And their faces were like, what? And I said, because I can't have you come in and ask me, what about this? What about that? I trust you to make decisions. Do it. And they did.
And look, and that goes in leadership, decentralized command, that principle. You knew you couldn't try, you knew your limits, you knew what you had to concentrate on, and you trusted other people. And that's what makes you the leader that you are. You have to be able to let go, but to be able to let go, you have to have the confidence that you got the competency in people to do that. And you were very lucky that you did.
Yes, no, I agree with you. And, and that took a lot of the burden off of me that week, because it allowed me to focus on what I needed to do for her family. We had a brand new assistant chief at the time. I had 3 lieutenants that were road patrol lieutenants, and I was changing the structure of the department when I became chief, and I was pitching this to the city. So they were letting me kind of have these guys shadow me, like a week at a time. And the one guy, I felt very strongly that he was the most qualified for that assistant chief position. So I went to the city and I just told them, I'm plugging him into that position. And that's the way it is. And again, that comes down to, it's not that I didn't, I don't run around just making decisions that I know are not mine to make, but when it's within my purview, I'm not afraid to do it. And so I just told them, here's what's going to happen. And they're like, okay, whatever you need. And I actually took a second lieutenant and put him off the road too, because I needed that support, the administrative support. We actually used supervisors from other departments too that were in command level that helped us out. I put a guy in charge of our pandemic stuff, and he was my COVID czar. We kind of jokingly called him. And so, it was huge, being able to rely on them. And I told the Lieutenant Dale Morris, who was the assistant chief, you're running the day-to-day operations, and I knew he would do it. I knew he could handle it, because I told him, I said, this week I need to completely be detached and available for this, for her family and for the arrangements and whatever needs to be done. I can't be worrying about day-to-day department stuff. And he took it. I never had to say another word to him. He just totally ran with it. And he hit it out of the park.
So let's talk a little bit about the funeral, and how many days from her death was her funeral?
It was a week later. She was killed on a Saturday, and the funeral was on Sunday, the following Sunday. And it was one of those days, the spring, we have these pear trees in Ohio, and the wind was blowing. And her dad would always joke about whenever the wind would blow that he and Kai would always call that the sexy breeze. And it was blowing like crazy that day. And he told me later on that was her, that was her presence, and that he felt there, with that. But it was amazing because, we were, by that time, the pandemic was in full swing. And, people, the news was telling people, hey, if you want to honor this officer, you can make, along the funeral procession route was about somewhere around 50. No, I guess it was closer to 20 miles. And I went from Spring Grove Cemetery, which is in the city of Cincinnati, all the way out to Springdale. And, they were suggesting that people stay in their homes and put on like blue hearts in their windows and basically, look out from their homes to keep each other safe. And you talk about a community outpouring, literally the entire region was lining that funeral route from the beginning at Spring Grove Cemetery all the way to Springdale. It was so, I felt so good to see all those people out for our people. You know what I mean? Because they needed it so badly, and they came out, they were just unbelievably loving. So it was, the funeral was, it was beautiful. For as hard as it was really a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I'm going to comment on that once we finish, because that's the kind of support we need. That these guys, men and women on the road, they need that every day.
Yeah.
So, but let's talk about some of the challenges that you faced during that week as a leader, because that's a long time. That week probably went by real fast in some ways and just seemed like a year in some of the others. So what was that week like for you and your department?
Well, I felt like I didn't sleep, and everyone was, like I said, everyone was all hands on deck. We were getting letters and flowers and food, and there were administrative people that were taking care of making sure every little that everything that was brought in was documented, so we could send thank yous later on. That's the kind of, and that's not stuff I asked people to do. That was stuff that people on their own thought of, and and made sure happened so that later on we could properly thank people that took care of us. And that was tremendous, and we had the public, for example, there was a guy that he put up a board out in front of the PD so that people could write messages. Since we couldn't have people in the PD because of the pandemic, they could write messages to our officers and about Kai and stuff on there. So again, these were just these little things of support that were just huge. And I remember thinking that whole week, every day was like it seemed like it was like a 15 to 18 hour day, and I hardly slept at all. And then when everything was all over with, it was like this huge exhale, and we started to go back to normal. And what I had realized, of course, this is later on after I had gotten some help for this, but what I didn't realize was how that I had been affected by the post-traumatic stress of the whole thing, and that I was functioning completely normally at work. But what I didn't realize is that when I would come home, I was totally disengaged. I would literally sit at home on the weekends and just stare out the window or just watch TV. And I was totally detached from, my family, my wife. My wife and I had gotten married that January, and I was,
hadn't been married that long. Yeah.
Right. And it was like, I was, I don't want to say I was like dead to her, but I was just like, I didn't want to deal with people.
You weren't the man she married. I can tell you that.
Yeah. I was completely overwhelmed by the situation and didn't know how to deal with it. And then I'd go back to work and I could step in and function completely normally. And I didn't realize this was happening. See what I'm saying? And she was kind of giving me a wide berth because she didn't know what to do either. And so it was, it just went on and on. And I was getting, I started out with I did some counseling with a group called Companions on a Journey, which is their focus is on grief counseling. And I thought I had really done well with that. And it wasn't until when another officer, which we can get into if you want me to talk about him now, or a little bit.
Yeah. That would be good. That's a pretty that's a strong story too.
Yeah. So I mean, here you look at the situation now. We're full swing of the pandemic. We had gotten into a cooperative mutual what's it called, a memorandum of understanding with two departments on either side of us, Sharonville and Forest Park Police, so that we could put the number of people out on the street we needed to put during the pandemic, so we could emulate that same schedule that Corrine Township had done for us when they were covering us. It was like the COVID schedule where you have like a 14-day ready reserve. You got half your troops that are being paid to stay home and stay healthy, and the other half are working. And then 2 weeks later, you flip them, and then the other ones stay home. And the idea behind that was that if we start having troops getting sick left and right, then you can pull from the reserves, right? So we started doing that, and of course, we went to emergency 12-hour shifts, and we told people, don't interact with each other. You got to stay healthy. We didn't know how bad the pandemic was going to get. We were telling people, be careful visiting with your families, all these different things, right at a time when they needed to be close to each other because of what happened with Kaya. They all needed to lean on each other's shoulders. We were basically telling them, hey, we know this, but you got to be safe. We need you to work. We need you to not be sick. So be careful, right? And so during this whole time when people needed each other, they were segregated from each other. You know what I mean? So they weren't really, we told them don't make traffic stops unless it's a serious issue, take reports over the phone. We changed the way we did everything to keep people from getting sick. And then during this whole time, what was percolating under the surface was that people were struggling. And one in particular was an officer named Mark Martin, who was very, very close to Kaya. And he's the one that actually found her that night on the highway. And without going into too graphic a detail, she was horribly injured, and he was trying to keep her, put together. Let's put it that way. And of course, you can imagine the trauma. Now, this guy, he's a former captain in the Army Rangers. He is the guy. If there's anyone in the department you'd want to be in that situation who could handle field medicine, it was him. And he blamed himself for not being able to save her, even though he knew that once we knew what her injuries were, he knew there was nothing he could have done. That her injuries were fatal from the moment she was struck, which I should go into that too about what happened with her. But he really felt a lot of personal responsibility for not being able to save her, and so he became suicidal. And I got that phone call one night from an officer he basically called another friend of his at the department and said, I can't go on anymore. I just can't live with this guilt. And I'm going to do it tonight. And then that officer called another officer who then called me. And of course, getting that phone call, this may sound strange, but it was worse than getting the phone call about Kaya, because what could I do about Kaya? This was a line of duty death. You can't change, sometimes, when there's evil in the world, officers die, and that's all there is to it. There was nothing that could have been done to undo that, but there was something that could have been done beforehand to undo what happened with Mark. And I had not gotten the resources before, because I was never really personally affected by post-traumatic stress during my career at all. So it was never on my front of my mind to have mental health resources in abundance at the PD. Yeah, we had the same basic EAP that everybody has, but never a real focus on it, how important it is. And so I missed it.
Well, but check the box type deal. Yeah.
And I never anticipated with him, and he never said a word. And all of a sudden, boom, here we are that night. And it's a rainy night. And this guy's like Rambo. If he doesn't want to be found, you're not going to find him. And the next thing I know, I'm out at his house on this rainy night with about half our department out there looking. We've got two different police departments scouring the area to try to find him. And finally, we did find him. And I took him that night to get help, thanks to the Claremont County Sheriff, Steve Leahy, gave me information about a hospital in Cincinnati called Beckett Springs. And they have a program called Help for Heroes. And he said, take him there. They have this program specifically for first responders and military. And saved our rear end, because that was a great program. And what I told Mark was, and Mark was very afraid that night that he was going to be in big trouble for what he said. And I said, look, the trouble for what? I said, you need help. I said, you're dealing with a situation. It's not you. It's the situation you were put in. And so we're going to get you the help that you need. And we did. And I had him go. There was set part of the time that he had to go to this program he was on duty for. And I told the city, we're sending him on duty time because that's the right thing to do. And we're doing it. And they're like, okay. And he was so appreciative of the fact that we stood behind what we said, and he got the help that was needed. And he came back later to the department and he told everybody, here's what the department did for me. You can, when the chief says we're going to do right by people, believe that shit, because he's being honest. And that was better than anything I could have ever said myself. You know what I mean? Is to have him be that messenger. And he has, he even wound up later on. He went on to, he was involved in a project to make a video about police officer suicide and how to prevent that and how to get resources. I couldn't be prouder of him. He's such an extremely inspiring person and such a great example to others.
Well, I think it started at the top with you. And so during this time, we have COVID. You lose an officer. You were very close to her. Your department's not super small, but it's small enough to where everybody's close. Everybody knows each other. It's a family. But life didn't cut you any slack. It kicked you and your family in the balls pretty good too. So if you want to talk about that a little bit, I just want to get an overall picture of all our listeners to understand what you as a leader, as a man, as a husband went through during this time, and what you can do. I'm sure if somebody gave you that scenario, you just said, man, I couldn't do that. But you did. And you do things because you have to. Yeah.
It's amazing what you can rise to the occasion to do when you're, the more pressure put on you. It's somehow or another, the human body is incredibly resilient.
Yep.
Well, of course, the next part of that whole chapter was we went through the George Floyd situation like everybody else did. And we went from being the everybody's heroes and the beloved Springdale Police Department that everyone had just honored so beautifully, for our officer that was killed, to become just part of the national script of hate against police. And, we have an extremely good reputation as a police department. We have, a great relationship with our community, but there were forces at work where people came from the outside to protest and do the things. They were like professional protesters, and they would go around to the different suburbs and, talk about this and that. And we had protesters at our place just the same. And that was it was hard for our officers, because in general, our officers felt very loved and supported by our community. And then all of a sudden to be seeing on TV every day that they're animals, that they're horrible people, and that the policing should be defunded and that policing should be ended in America, and all this ridiculous stuff. Absolutely just it's a joke to even make such suggestions. And it was hitting everybody very hard. And that was a very difficult, thing to all of a sudden have happen right in the wake of everything that happened with Kaya. And then I remember on July 4th, I was like everybody else, just trying to make heads or tails of everything. And on July 4th, Independence Day, Toledo Police Department had the loss of an officer where this gentleman was an Islamic-born police officer. It was the reason I point that out is because this is on Independence Day. You talk about the true American story. This guy loved being a cop, and he was beloved in his community, and he was shot. And when he was hit, he must have known that it was a bad, injury. And he came over the radio and said, "Tell my family I love them." And you can hear that clear on you can go on YouTube and hear it. It was, wow. And it was just, it hit me like a ton of bricks. It brought everything back from the night that Kaya was killed. And, I thought to myself, I know what that family is feeling. I know what the chief is feeling. I know what that department's feeling. It was the first Ohio line of duty death after Kaya's, and it just bowled me over. And I'd already been experiencing post-traumatic stress without realizing it. We had a situation where I lost my train of thought. We of course had the protests and everything that were going on. And then we had, I was giving every time I would give a speech and long and short of it, to cut it short, we had a gentleman in town that wanted to plant a tree in memory of Kaya. And then we also had a big vase in front of the PD that we hired an artist to redesign that had some elements in it that would be memorializing Kaya, but it also was for the police department, And so when we had that presentation, I was speaking up there in front of everybody. There was a couple hundred people there for that. And I just started crying again. And I had found that when I was giving a public speech, I would have this flashback to the night that Kaya was killed, that I remembered seeing all of our employees sitting in front of me after the press conference, and me explain to them what had happened with her, and the looks on their faces, the trauma, the anguish, the fear, the anger, all the different things that were going on in their emotions. and I would see their faces when I would be doing a public speaking, and I would just start losing it emotionally. And that day I did again. And I went into my office. My wife was there, and I said, look, today's the day. I need to get help. And I went through that same program that Mark had gone through. I checked myself in there. It was an outpatient place. They had inpatient also, but they told me I only needed the outpatient. And it was called partial hospitalization plan, where I went every day, 5 days a week, 4 hours a day. And I did that for 5 weeks. And it was huge. It was a tremendous help. And I will never say how many, but I will tell you that numerous officers on the department took advantage of that program, as well as other ones where they came to me personally asking for assistance for different things, or to be pointed in the right direction for those kind of resources. And I'm so thankful for that, because again, I felt very strong. And then I wound up doing a piece for the Cincinnati Enquirer about that. They asked me to talk about it publicly. And I decided, it's important to talk about this, because if you don't share your personal struggles, especially in the position I was in, everyone, a lot of people are dealing with these things. And if you don't share what you've been through, you can't help other people and help other people grow and find the help they need. And so I did it, and it wound up being a tremendous thing in our region about, hey, this guy was willing to talk about his personal struggles. And it really kind of opened the door to that in our area.
Well, so you would say that was the day you woke up and realized that it was time to take care of Tom Wells.
Yes.
Because you had been taking care of everybody else. And
That's
that's what high level people, what it's hard for high level people to do is that, because all we're trying to do is take care of everybody else.
Yeah.
And what we have to realize is you can't take care of anybody until you take care of yourself. And that's where I'm proud of you for that. You didn't wait till it was too late, till something tragic happened. You recognized, and that's huge, man. It's hard for people to do. And I guarantee you, because you were probably thinking people are going to look down on you, they're going to lose respect for you, when it was the opposite. People gained respect for you and looked up to you more because you were vulnerable.
Yes. And that's the key word there, is being vulnerable. I'm so glad you used that, because that's the key to this whole thing, is for, especially in police leadership, be vulnerable. You'd be amazed how strong you are when you're vulnerable. People always worry about, well, people are going to think this of me and they're going to think that of me. That makes you weak, worrying about what other people think. Be yourself and be vulnerable, and you'll be amazed how much you gain in people's respect and how people look at you differently. I got to admit, now, when I first went up there that day, my first thought was I was so in need of the help. I didn't care. I don't want to make any, when I draw this comparison, I don't know what it's like to commit suicide, obviously, and I've never really been suicidal to the point where I wanted to kill myself, but I can imagine that people that are in that position feel like they have no other recourse. They want whatever it is that's paining them. They want that to stop. And that's how I felt that day. I felt like I want this pain to stop. And so I didn't care what people thought. I just went up there and I told, and I got in there. And once I was in there being assessed, I was like, what have I done? When it gets out that I came here, I'm going to be I'm going to be in trouble. And
so
then
that's
I was
a problem.
Yeah. But, then I said to myself, I don't care, because I need the help. And that's what's most important. Like you said, what's most important is getting the help. It's not, I don't care what people think.
That's a problem, is we demonize help so much. And then, I mean, you probably can have examples too. Now, this is probably years ago. We were both in around the same time we entered law enforcement in the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Man, if in the early 90s, you would have been, your gun would have been taken away, and you would have been, man, the guy's nuts, he can't carry a gun. Well, that's why nobody wants to get help. That's why nobody's going to admit that they have, any sort of problems.
Right. Oh, you're absolutely right. And I had people contact me after I came out publicly with that story and say, well, I tried doing that at my department and I got put on leave. I got taken off a SWAT. I got this and that. And so that's still happening today.
Yeah, you go on cuckoo leave. Now Tom's on cuckoo leave. He can't handle it.
Yeah. But what I did was I turned it around by, first of all, after I went there and got assessed, I went to my bosses and I said, look, I'm going to that same program that we sent this other officer to and that other people have gone to. And I said, I'm going there, because if I don't, I'm not going to be the chief you need me to be. And I'm going to come to work. And then when I get at 3:30, when their program starts, I'm going to be up there and I'll finish out my day up there. And then the rest will be on me. And I didn't ask. I just told them that's what I was going to do. And once again, they were like, we want you to, that's great. because it's in their best interest that I'm at my best as well, And so it turned out to be, it was life-saving. It really was.
So our generation, mine and yours, we have passed the torch. We have passed it on to a new generation of leaders and administrators and chiefs and that. What advice would you give them in the situation that this situation was most critical of your career? What do you feel like you want them to know that you did well? Because let me tell you what, and I know you're a humble guy, but Tom, you have to be proud of yourself. You had to at least at one point say, man, when you get promoted to a chief, even though you were the assistant chief, you knew you were ready. There probably was a little bit of doubt. And I know that day you had to at least one time say, yeah, I was ready for this job. So what made you proud, and what would you want somebody to repeat, and what would you want them not to repeat?
I think what I'm most proud of is how we rose it together as a team, that even though I might have led that effort as the chief of police, it was really people stepping up, whether I asked them or whether they on their own stepped up. It was how we all worked together to one common goal, which was to honor Kaya and honor her family. That's what I'm most proud of. I feel like when I look back on that, I would never wish that experience on anybody, but I felt like there was a reason I was made chief for that. Like, I feel like I was literally put there for that situation. I feel like I was the right guy for the job. And again, I'm not saying that to be egotistical at all. I'm trying to, I just feel like I was good at taking care of people. And even though the downside of that was I took care of other people too much and didn't take care of me. But then I learned by going to that program and getting the help I needed, I learned so much more about mental health and about post-traumatic stress and how it affects people differently and how it affects our first responders, that it helped me be a voice for that. So I'm not sorry that happened. You see what I'm saying? I'm glad. My biggest regret in that whole thing was that I didn't have those resources set up beforehand. I think to answer your question about what I wouldn't want people to say about me, I wouldn't want them to say, yeah, Tom did not have the foresight in all those years he was assistant chief to develop a robust mental health program for our department, because that is embarrassing in this day and age. You cannot fail to do that. But on the other hand, I'm really proud of the fact that that we were able to turn that around. And there's other people in our region. I mean, there's a lady named Amy Foley she's the executive director of the Tri-State Peer Support Team. She works regionally in our area to bring peer support training and all this to police and fire. It's fantastic how this has blown up. And I work with her on her board. And, I'm a very vocal person, as are other chiefs of police and fire departments, to help get that word out, that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to be vulnerable, because you're dealing with a situation. It's not you that's got a problem. It's the situations you're put in.
Well, so I tell people that if you want friends, don't be a leader, go buy a truck, because when you have a truck, everybody wants to be your friend because they want to borrow your truck, go to the lumber store or something. Yeah, man, being a leader's hard. And what I think a lot of times is people don't want to be, because they don't want that responsibility. They don't want that. Well, that's shame on them. When you have that ability and you got to stand up. Yes. And we had a real tragic incident here a couple of years ago, and I had a subordinate leader. It was probably right before I retired. And he came to me, we were friends, and he come sit down with me, and we dropped the ball of some stuff, and it turned out tragic. And he said, I don't think I want to do this anymore. And I think he thought I was going to coddle him a little bit. And I looked at him in his eye. I said, "You're a fucking coward." I said, "If you quit on these people, nobody is going to take care of people like you take care of them. Yeah. Nobody is going to take care of their men, take care of their women like you do. Yeah. So you're going to bail because you made a mistake. Yeah, you made a mistake. And a tragedy happened because you made a mistake. But you know what? Nobody is going to be the person you are. So quit being a coward and get your ass back out there." Right. And that's what we have to realize is, when it's time for you to stand up, are you going to stand up and lead? Right. And you did, man. I'm so proud of you for that. Speaking of her family, please tell, and I hope you send this to her father, Kevin. We talked to him. We called him the day after you gave the presentation. Yep. At the conference. Talk about a stand-up dude. Talk about him a little bit.
You talk about it, and he, he's another one that got me through that darkness. You sit here and you think to yourself, what can I do to help them? And without realizing that they're doing, that people like are out there doing things to help you. Kevin has been such a rock of strength, and I know that, I know it's the pain today. I can't even imagine what that's like for him. And I know he thinks about her all the time. And I losing a child, I can't even fathom what that would be like, But here's a guy who, within a short period of time, as he lives in Georgia. He was going to the Georgia Cops organization and volunteering to go to police departments and go to families of officers killed in the line of duty within months of Kaya being killed, because he knew what it was like to feel that. And he wanted to bring that support to those police departments and families. That's the kind of man he is. He rides in the police unity tour. You talk about a beloved guy. He rides in the police unity tour with our officers. And when everybody finds out that he's the father of a fallen officer, they surround him with just the love. They just can't believe it.
Well, he raised a hell of a daughter, and that shows who she was.
Yeah.
So, any before we talk about how one of your favorite passions, and I was not going to bring you on and not let you talk about trains, so we'll talk about that a little bit to close it out. Anything else you'd like to? Any advice? Any leaders and any officers? And I'm gonna go on a soapbox a little bit at the end about what we talked about the community support. But anything you'd like to add on that?
Well, just to kind of round that out, what I'd like to say is that, if you're in a position where you're fortunate enough to be placed in a position to lead other people, do it. Don't all of a sudden have that position and then feel like that you can't, or that you don't know how, or that find out, go to training, talk to people, get a mentor, do all those things. But whatever you do, get out there and be in front of things and lead. And lead just means taking care of people. Just do the right thing for people. Do right by people. That means supervise your troops. That means having difficult conversations with people that need to have those discussions. It's not letting people get away with whatever they want. Be someone that people can look up to at the end of their career and say, that person helped me be a better me. That's what I would say to anybody. And that goes for anyone that's leading other people, whether it's informal leadership all the way up to the chief of police. And the other thing is support your people. I wanted to just go real quickly and talk about a video, and I don't know if you want me to say where it is.
No, we go as long as you want, man.
Okay.
People need to hear this.
Well, I was watching, this is just last night. I saw a video on YouTube, and I normally don't, I'm not I got to watch all these videos type of guy, but I saw this video, and it was talking about these Illinois state troopers where one was shot on this traffic stop. And so I watched this video, this body camera, or there was in-car video, which I should say. And the long and the short of it was they were talking to this pair that was broken down on the roadway, and they were trying to help them. And then they wound up learning that these two had lied to them and given them bad info. And the guy was wanted on weapons charges. And the next thing you know, he pulls a gun out of the car and shoots one of them. And all I could think of watching this video go down was, these guys are afraid of getting in trouble. They are not doing what they need to be doing because they're afraid they won't be supported. That's the bottom line. I don't have to be there. I don't need to be the guy who knows exactly what happened at that scene. I could see it play out right then and there. And what sickens me about our profession is that police officers are not being supported and being told, do what you need to do. That doesn't mean go out there and, I'm not saying we should go out there and manhandle people and abuse people. But the last thing, that's the farthest from it. What I'm saying is, if you have to use force, be swift and sure, because the job means the police win, means the law wins. It doesn't mean that this asshole who produced the gun was able to shoot this one officer because they were not prepared to act and do what they needed to do to take him into custody. They could have easily taken him into custody. He wasn't resisting that seriously, but they wouldn't do it because they were afraid of how it might look. And one of them winds up getting shot over it. And then it's just like I said, I'm not trying to beat these guys up. You could probably find 50 videos like that, because that's how police officers in this country feel right now. And it's really sad. That's why we have such trouble hiring them, because no one wants to do a job they're not going to be supported in. And it's a job that people need to know them being supported. So I'll get off my soapbox with that.
No, you got me fired up. I'm gonna go ahead and get on my soapbox now.
Yeah.
Then we'll. I promise you, we're gonna talk about trains, because I don't want to. That's what we all have that one thing that helps us through. But let me tell you this, and I wrote this in a blog a couple of weeks ago. I went to I was doing some landscape around my house and pruning some trees, and I went to the dump, and I had a bunch of, and it was a pretty week, and a lot of people had been doing work outside. Well, at the dump, there was dozens of people, Everybody showed up with a trailer. Everybody's out there just automatically walks up, starts helping people. Everybody's nice. Just it didn't matter about anything, race, sex, anything. Why are we like that every fucking day?
I don't know.
Why we treat people like that every day? And the community, I'm proud of your community for supporting y'all. Why aren't we getting that community support every day? Why does it take the death of an officer for people to appreciate what these men and women are doing on the street? So our listeners, if you want to be protected and you want us law enforcement administrators to be able to hire good people, competent people, people that want to do this job, then you fucking support them 24/7. You don't just support them when it's cool or when you that was between Kai's death and George Floyd, what, 2 months?
Exactly.
So they forgot. So they forgot in 2 months how great of a department that your department was.
Yeah. I give you a perfect example. We had an officer during one of the protests there at our police department during that George Floyd thing. His post was to protect our driveway so people couldn't come to the back of the PD. And this guy, he's a sergeant now, Eric Langevin is his name. And the year prior to that, he had been involved in a situation where a black gentleman had gone into our Target store, and he was at the back of the store with a knife and a propane canister. And he was hoping that someone would come in and shoot him. He was trying to do a suicide by cop. He tried to bait the officers, and he kept approaching them, and they did everything they could, and including they were getting ready to tase him. But Sergeant Langevin kept talking to this guy, and for whatever reason, he stopped moving forward and started listening. And Eric wound up talking to this guy for about an hour and 15 minutes until he finally dropped both the propane bottle and the knife. Now, I've seen those videos. Our officers would have been totally justified had they used force on him. And I thank God every day that he stopped and was able to listen, and that he allowed those officers to help him. And they were all patient. It wasn't just Eric. Every one of them showed great restraint. And he got the help that he needed, and he's alive today because of it. And the only reason I brought up the fact that he's black, Eric is white, it didn't matter. What matters is you have a police officer who cares about another human being, that they're going through something terrible. And all he cared about was seeing this guy through it so we could get him help. Right. Yeah. And now you got these protesters out there trying to tell Eric, come join us, leave your post and stand with us and protest against your own department. And he's like, I can't, this is my duty here. And they start yelling, fuck you, you're a piece of shit, blah, 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 blah. They don't have any idea, no idea whatsoever. And they're not even from our area. You know what I mean? These are people that are professional protesters. And I'm like, this is what's so sick. And that's what gets on TV. And I hate to say this, I'm not trying to be political here, but what people see on television, on the news, a lot of times is what they believe is reality, and it's not. And so
it's
when
far from reality, it's so removed from reality. It's not.
It is, you know. And so our society has been conditioned to believe that the police are bad. It's like you go through these cycles, you know what I mean? Like back in the 60s where the police were the pigs and they can't be trusted and they're part of the establishment. And I think it also, to be honest with you, again, this has nothing to do with Republican or Democrat. The fact is the pandemic really cost a lot of people trusting of the government, no matter what side you fall on. And the police are the most visible form of the government and the ones that the people interact the most with. And if you don't trust your government and you feel like your government's corrupt, you're going to believe that the police are that way too. And when that happened with George Floyd, it was like, see, told you so. And that's where, you know what I mean? And I think that is just a terrible, perfect storm of circumstances that have really hurt our profession. And we're still,
we may have another, we may do another episode. And have you been following did you watch The Fall of Minneapolis? Did you watch that documentary?
You know what? I've not seen it yet. I was just recently told about it, and I'm going to watch it.
You need to watch it. And we might talk about it in another month or two, but I want to see how this thing unfolds, because that's alarming. And,
yes,
you know, I know there has been innocent people throughout time go to prison, and that's a terrible thing. Police officers, everybody talks about police officers should be, I could really get off on this, you know, well, they should be treated like everybody else. You damn right. They should be treated like everybody else, and they're not, but in the opposite way. They're immediately judged. They're immediately convicted. They want their names to be released. You don't release people's names if they're not charged with anything. Right. That's not something that the general public has a has a fear of or should have a worry of. So why should police officers? Why should the names be released? Why should it's a very good chance these officers were convicted for political reasons, and for they were already convicted in public perception,
Absolutely,
and in a court of public opinion.
Yeah,
but then they're going to be in prison because of that. That's
Yes.
not okay for anybody.
no.
So
And I
we'll
would
talk about
challenge-
that. We may talk about that. Now, you did volunteer that you and Joe Collins would come on Two Finger Tuesday.
Yeah,
That might be a Two Finger Tuesday subject matter we'll sit around and have a drink about. So let's talk about trains a little bit. That's something you have a passion of, and something you're doing now post-retirement.
Yes, it is. Well, as I told you earlier, when I was at a young age, I really had a passion for trains, and I wanted to get into the railroad industry. And at that time, it wasn't a possibility. And then a friend of mine who's a retired police chief, he had worked for Norfolk Southern after he retired, and he found a job here. Anyone that if you don't know anything about railroads, the worst thing about working for the railroad is the schedule. It is literally like constant jet lag. They can work you up to 12 hours, and they have to give you 10 hours off. But a lot of times you get stuck at your away terminal for 2 or 3 days at a time. It is brutal lifestyle. You're basically married to the railroad. The pay is great. And as one hiring session I went to, they said, you're going to have all kind of things. You're going to have a big house. You're going to have a boat. You're going to have camper, whatever you want. And your family's going to love using those things, but you're going to be at work because they want people to know what it's going to be like.
Yeah.
So I was able to, long and the short of it is, my buddy Matt, he got tired of that lifestyle pretty quickly, especially being as a retiree, and he was able to get a job with a local railroad called the Cincinnati Railway Company. And we do like things like a dinner train. Then we have like a kind of a tourist train that runs out in the country that has different events, like wine train, and they have kids, themed trains princess trains. Yeah, it's so nice. It's really cool. And then we do excursions. I'm actually qualified to run trains all the way from Cincinnati to Detroit because we go to different parts of Ohio, and we bring passenger trains to different communities so they can enjoy a ride on a train. So I love that job, and it enabled me to become a certified conductor and then eventually a locomotive engineer. And I've been doing that actually for 8 years now, even while I was a police officer, believe it or not, because it was mostly on the weekends. Well, now that I'm retired, I was able to find a job. There's a local freight railroad called the Cincinnati Eastern Railway. And I just started working for them, hauling freight. And I tell you what, I love it. 2 or 3 days a week, 8 a.m. call times, home every night. And it's just a blast. I love the guys I work with. And it really is exactly what I needed. It's one of the things I remember the day I retired last year in July. I said to my wife, we were in my office, and I said, you know what I just realized? And she goes, what's that? I said, that from now until I draw my last breath, I can do whatever the fuck I want. Pardon my French.
Exactly.
But you know what I mean? You feel like all these years you've been, like you said before, you've punched a clock for somebody else. Yeah. And I, don't get me wrong, I love my career. I love the people I work with. I love being a public servant. But when you retire, and I worked for 34 and a half years as a cop, that's enough. And I'm ready to take care of me now. And I understand what it means to take care of me because of the help I got. And so that's why I got a big smile on my face.
No, man, I'm very happy for you, and I'm very proud of you. And you're going to be telling that. You're going to keep telling your story, and you're telling it again. From what you told me, you're telling it again at this year's conference in Kansas City.
Yep.
Well, I will be there again, and I will be there every time that I can. And man, I cannot thank you enough for coming on, and I'm going to hold you and Joe to doing Two Finger Tuesday real soon.
Yep.
So I don't know if you watched the episode with Joe. He was here. He came live, so he got a bottle of wine. I will bring your bottle. I will bring your bottle of McGee family wine with me to Kansas City.
All right.
Just like I told Joe, man, I'm gonna tell you that the highest status in James McGee's world is good fucking dude. Tom Wells, you're a good fucking dude. I love you. Couldn't ask for a better man. Couldn't ask for a better friend. Thank you. And man, I'm proud of you. That's all I can really say.
Can I tell a little story on you real fast?
Oh, you absolutely can.
So I generally like to keep personal stuff personal, but last year, Jimmy spearheaded an impromptu retirement party for me at the FBI National Conference in Denver. And we had a really good turnout of our session mates, and there were 17 of us, and then several people that I know from Ohio there. And he got the whole all of them corralled together, and it was so. I'll never forget that moment because you guys spoke from the heart, especially you, and you gave me a buck knife that said
I
those
did.
words. You gave me a buck knife that has right on there inscripted. It says Tom Wells, a great fucking guy, and with our session number on there.
Yeah.
And it funny as that is, I appreciate it because I know exactly where you're coming from when you say that. I know what your heart is and how much you love people and how much it makes me so incredibly. I'm proud to be your friend, and I thank you so much for that. It meant the world to me that you cared enough about me to do that, to put that get together, and it just and to have that that little special gift that I know that you were behind. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I love you.
Well,
The bottom
I
of my
love
heart.
you too, man. I appreciate it. So until next time, until Two Finger Tuesday, McGee and Wells are out.